Chapter 23 of A Weaver of Dreams by Myrtle Reed. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 23. Gossip.
"Folks as wants to live in the city can if they like," said Aunt Belinda pointedly. "It's plenty enough excitin' for me right here."
"Jest so, Mother, jest so."
Uncle Henry was nodding in a sunny corner of the kitchen porch, sniffing appreciatively now and then at the spicy scents that were wafted afar from the preserving kettle.
"Is it termater pickles?"
"No, it's peaches, and yellow tomato preserves with lemon peel in 'em."
"I'd admire to taste the peaches, Mother, when you think they're done. I ain't never seen your beat on pickles."
"They ain't done yet. They've got to cook slow or they'll bust."
She came out, wiping her flushed face upon her apron, and settled down in the decrepit rocker that stood beside Uncle Henry's armchair.
"As I was sayin'," she resumed, "it's plenty excitin' for me right here."
"So 'tis, Mother, so it is."
"What with the marryin' and the givin' in marriage and the swappin' of partners goin' on almost at the last minute, a body'd get flustered if they let theirselves get to dwellin' on it."
"Then don't dwell on it, Mother."
"I ain't a dwellin'. I was just a thinkin'. I was wonderin' what his mother'd say if she knew it."
"Whose mother?"
"His. What'd she think of her son chasin' after one girl for 3 or 4 years, and then gettin' engaged to her, and buildin' her a house, and gettin' the furniture most all into it, and then gettin' hisself engaged to another girl that he ain't never seen 6 months ago? What do you say?"
"I'd say that as long as he was the one that was goin' to live with her, he had the most to say about it. I wouldn't let it concern me none."
"But it ain't honorable, Henry. I can't bear to have him do a thing like that. His own mother couldn't have brung him up more carefully for the last 5 years than I have."
"He was brung up, Belinda, when he come here. You ain't had nothin' to do with it."
"I suppose not," she returned sarcastically. "I ain't picked up after him, and cooked for him, and mended his clothes, and put cream on his sunburn, and fed his pets, and aired his low-necked coat to keep the moths out of it, have I?"
"That ain't nothin', Mother. It's only woman's work."
"Humph!" she snorted. "What have you done?"
"Me?" queried Uncle Henry reminiscently. "Why, I've built the pigeon house."
"He helped you do that."
"And the shed for the autymobile."
"He paid a carpenter to help you do that."
"And I made the roads so's he wouldn't have to run over the grass."
"That ain't nothin'. Makin' roads ain't."
"No,"
the old man sighed.
"Mebbe not. Folks make their own roads, and we can't help 'em none. All we can do is to smooth the path a bit. I've thought lots of times that if we all tried to make other people's paths easy, our own feet would have a smooth even place to walk on."
"You talk like a minister, Henry."
She was not to be diverted by spiritual parallels from the main issue.
"What I'm sayin' is that it ain't decent for him to act so, and I don't know what to do about it."
"There ain't nothin' to be did, Belinda. You can't make Miss Judith marry him if she don't want to, and I reckon she don't. She could have."
"What do you think Miss Judith has done? She's gone and given that handkerchief linen that she spent months embroiderin' to that Marjory for a weddin' dress. She said it was made for his weddin', and she wanted the dress to be there. What do you think about that?"
"Who told you?"
"Miss Bancroft's Susie."
"Why'dn't she give it to Miss Bancroft?"
"I dunno. That's what I'd have done, if I hadn't been goin' to use it myself."
"Where they all goin' to live afterwards?"
"Who? After what?"
"After all the marryin'."
Aunt Belinda sighed.
"I dunno, Henry," she answered with wifely patience. "If I did, I'd tell you."
She had the air of one unwillingly placed upon the witness stand.
"He's give her the house."
Uncle Henry reached over to the broom, selected a straw, and chewed it meditatively.
"Who'd he give it to? Her or Marjory?"
"Her."
"Henry Warner, how long have you knowed that?"
Since day before yesterday, when I was to the store after the cinnamon, and you sent me back to get that kind that comes in sticks."
"Who told you?"
"Cy Walters. He was over to the courthouse, and he see the deed all recorded. Carter Keith to Judith Sylvester, for $1 and other valuable considerations."
"Land sakes! She ain't doin' so bad, then. She's gettin' the house without the trouble of a husband. I reckon she's smarter than I thought."
If the comment contained a hidden arrow, it glanced harmlessly aside from the armor of Uncle Henry's content. From his sunny corner he contemplated the rolling meadows that stretched from the road back to the hills. One of Carter's rabbits had escaped from its hutch and was hopping across the clover patch with an air of festivity. Pigeons promenaded back and forth in the sun with deep-throated murmurs, which seemed to indicate that it was a bright and beautiful morning, and that all was well.
"The ladies at the sewin' circle was sayin' yesterday," she continued, "that after Miss Cynthia had waited as long as she had, she'd order to have a husband that wasn't lame. So I up and told 'em that Mr. Chandler and Miss Cynthia was made lame at the same time, and they was that surprised."
"Don't take much to surprise a sewin' circle," the old man said meditatively.
"P'raps not."
Aunt Belinda clucked her teeth sharply, as she often did when she was annoyed.
"I don't know why women shouldn't talk about the things that interests 'em, same as men do."
"Women gossips," replied Uncle Henry, severely. "Men doesn't."
"What do you call gossipin', Henry Warner? Answer me that."
"Talkin' about things that don't matter. Tellin' things about people. Like Miss Bancroft's Susie telling you that Miss Judith had give her address. What's that amount to? That's gossip."
"And Cy Walters tellin' you that he'd give her the house, and that he'd seen the record of it, for $1 and other valuable considerations. And you settin' on a soap box all the afternoon to discuss it, and forgettin' to bring the right cinnamon, and havin' to be sent back for it. That ain't gossip, is it?"
"No, Belinda, 'tain't. That's business."
"Is business transacted on soap boxes?"
"Might be,"
he returned cautiously. He had the feeling that an unsuspected trap was about to close upon him.
"Business is transacted wherever men happens to be. Restaurants, stores, hotels, saloons, or any other place. Offices, too."
"Miss Stebbins was sayin' at the sewin' circle that she reckoned about the first thing to be did after women got the vote would be to pass a law requirin' all saloons to be closed at 5 o'clock, so's the men could get home to their suppers in decent season."
"I ain't in favor of women's votin'."
"Why not?"
Aunt Belinda bristled, for the modern unrest had penetrated the sewing circle.
"Well, they ain't got time. It'd take 'em away from their home duties."
"It don't take no more time to vote than it does to go to the market."
"That ain't what I'm speakin' of. They'd have to think about how they was goin' to vote, and why. It'd divert their minds."
"I dunno why they'd have to think about it. Men doesn't."
"Women orter to be protected from the hardships of the world."
"Yes, they orter, but they ain't. As long as over half the world's work is slid onto women's shoulders, I don't see why they shouldn't have somethin' to say about the runnin' of it."
"I'm glad I ain't called on to settle it," he mused. "There ain't no use of gettin' yourself stirred up, Belinda. Smiles is pretty and pleasant, but it takes fists to do things, and a vote orter have a fist behind it."
"Moral force," she began.
"It's all right in lots of places, but it takes fists and clubs and guns to make a man's world straight. A mob, now, do you suppose a lady policeman could walk into a mob and smile and say, 'Gentlemen, will you please disperse yourselves and go to your separate homes?' A club is what's needed, or mebbe the fire hose."
"I could turn on the fire hose," returned Aunt Belinda, thoughtfully. "I'd admire to do it."
"I reckon you would. If we'd had a hose, I'll reckon you'd have turned it on me more'n once when your temper got hit up. That's why I ain't never bought one."
"I wouldn't have turned no cold water on you, Henry. You'd take your death o' cold. Sakes alive! The peaches are burnin'."
She fled to the rescue, and Uncle Henry, unperturbed, selected another broom straw with extreme care. When she came out he reverted to the original topic.
"When's he goin' to leave?"
"I dunno. He ain't said yet. He's been packin' up his clothes and books and fishin' tackle and other traps, but he ain't talked none about movin' the furniture."
"I forgot," returned Uncle Henry, placidly chewing upon his straw. "He told me we was to keep the furniture in remembrance of him, and 'I hope, Uncle Henry,' he says, 'that you and Aunt Belinda will see your way clear to take some other lonely young fellow into your hearts and home, and be father and mother to him same's you've been to me.' Them's his very words."
"Henry Warner! When'd he tell you that?"
"I dunno as I could say just when. Last week sometime, I reckon. I disremember."
"Well, if you ain't the beatin'est! I never in all my life—"
Aunt Belinda's lower jaw dropped, but words mercifully failed.
"It's a wonder you wouldn't tell me somethin' now and then," she concluded sarcastically.
"I do, Belinda, I do. What's right and proper for you to know I tell you in due season, and what ain't I don't. I never was one to gossip."
"I don't know of anythin' you've ever kept to yourself. I ain't complainin' that you don't tell me everythin'. I'm complainin' that you don't do it quick enough."
"A man is obliged to have a reservoir for his mind. He can't let everythin' trickle out the minute it gets in, like a woman does."
"Reservoir?"
she repeated scornfully.
"You'd better say cistern, with the cover off, too, and mosquitoes hatchin' on top."
"You remind me some of a pepper box, Belinda. If you'll bring me the corn, I'll feed the pigeons. It must be about time. And if you'll bring out a pail of water when you come to, I'll go and fill the tile so's they can drink. It's got low, and one of 'em almost fell into it just now."
A cloud of feathered pensioners descended into the yard as the first handful of corn struck the bare earth. Aunt Belinda stood watching, but Uncle Henry, as was his wont, sat whenever it was possible to sit. He had theories about
"making his mind save his feet,"
and was occasionally reminded with a certain tartness that he never used his mind for any other purpose.
"I wonder," he was saying, "how they know what time it is. By their stomachs, I reckon, same's a man does. What are you layin' out to have for dinner, mother?"
"There ain't goin' to be no dinner till after the peaches and tomatoes is put up. I'll get you a snack of bread and cheese if you'd like it. You can set out here and eat it."
"All right. Mebbe I could eat one or two of them cold sausages, too. And I'd like one of them peaches, no matter whether it's cooked or not. Raw peaches is good."
"But raw pickles ain't. You shan't have none till they're good and done, so you can just make up your mind to wait."
"All right."
He had the pathetic submissiveness of the married man in his tone.
"I was wonderin' whether as long as he's give us the furniture, he wouldn't let us keep the rabbits and pigeons and dogs. I'd admire to have 'em. They remind me of him so."
"That's for you and him to settle, father. If I was a man and was just goin' to be married, I don't know what I'd want of a menagerie."
"Do you remember the time he went huntin' and brought home that little wildcat to tame?"
"I ain't likely to forget it. And the mud turtle that was forever climbin' out of its pan and walkin' around where it could get stepped on."
"I remember. Miss Judith told him he ought to name the turtle Maud, because it insisted on goin' into the garden, and he said he was goin' to call it Napoleon, on account of the bony part."
"I suppose there was some joke in that. I can remember yet how they was laughin'."
"So can I. But there needn't have been no joke. Folks in love is terrible easy to please."
"If they wasn't, they wouldn't be in love, I reckon."
"Mebbe not."
Uncle Henry munched peacefully at his bread and cheese, and threw an occasional bit to the pigeons. He shared his cold sausage with one of the collies, and Aunt Belinda set out a panful of scraps for the remainder of the kennel, which arrived immediately with a unanimous and unmistakable request.
"I was just thinkin' about Miss Cynthia.
he continued, settling back comfortably in his chair.
"Ain't it funny that she and Chandler should have been in the same wreck, and livin' here these 20 years and more, and never layin' eyes on each other, and now they're goin' to be married? It beats all."
"That was where they got acquainted, in the wreck. If either of 'em had ever went anywhere, they'd have seen each other, but they've both stayed close to home."
"They could have went if they was a mind to," he suggested.
"I suppose they could. Miss Cynthia got up there quick enough when she was once in the notion. But how'd they know they was the ones that was wrecked together?"
"How'd it come that they knowed it now? Why ain't they just stayed here and never seen each other till they was both dead?"
"On account of them both havin' kept their mouths shut, and neither of 'em being given to gossip. Just by chance, they each tells Miss Judith, I understand, and she goes right ahead and fixes things up. Men muddles things, and women straightens 'em out."
"If men is muddlers, women is meddlers. Ain't it so, Belinda?"
Uncle Henry laughed heartily at his own joke, but nobody else appeared to notice it.
"He was tellin' me yesterday," the old man continued after a pause, "that he had a couple of friends in mind that he thought would like to come here and stay with us. One of 'em is a lawyer, same as he is, and the other works in a bank. Must be nice to work in a bank. Shuttin' up shop at 3 o'clock, and at noon on Saturdays all the year round."
"Henry Warner! Why didn't you tell me that yesterday?"
"I ain't given to gossip, Belinda. Besides, there ain't no hurry, is there? He said he'd bring 'em both out to supper to night and let 'em see how they liked the place. The bankin' feller has been driv almost crazy by too much arithmetic, and the doctor told him he must have quiet."
"Henry Warner, you're enough to try the patience of a saint. Here you've knowed since yesterday that there was goin' to be company for supper, and you ain't never said a word to me about it. What am I going to do, I'd like to know?"
Tears of vexation rolled down her wrinkled cheeks.
"There, there, Belinda," comforted Uncle Henry. "What's good enough for him and me is good enough for anybody else, ain't it?"
"I ain't sayin' it isn't," she snapped. "But what'll feed 3 ain't goin' to make 5 comfortable. And if the 2 that's comin' has got appetites anythin' like yours and his, it'll mean cookin' from now till train time to get enough to fill 'em up. You go and hitch up, and I'll write out what I want at the store."
A pained expression came upon the old man's face.
"But my dinner, Belinda."
"Your dinner, Henry Warner, is your supper. There's another cold sausage in the pantry, and you can munch on it whiles you're drivin' in."
"But—"
"Don't stop to talk. Go and hitch up, and see that you come right back. Promise me you won't set down until you come home."
Weakly he promised.
"Must have done somethin' terrible,"
he said to himself as he went toward the barn,
"or Belinda'd never make me go to town without my dinner. She knows I'm likely to get sick if I don't have my meals regular. Women is queer, even the best of 'em. They certainly is."
Late in the afternoon Aunt Belinda relented. She had her kitchen table heavily laden with jar after jar of preserves and pickles. A pleasant spicy odor pervaded the spotless house, the table was set with the best china and silver, and a feast, which included hot biscuits and honey, was well under way. Aunt Belinda herself had donned her second best black silk, and had on a new white apron. She appeared before the dejected one with a tray laden with sandwiches and warm little cakes, fresh from the oven, and a teapot steaming in the center. He ate gratefully, and of his own accord took the ravaged tray into the house.
"I reckoned you'd find it comfortin'," she said pacifically.
"It was, Mother. You've been givin' me comfort ever since I've knowed you."
"And you me. That is, most of the time."
Aunt Belinda was trying to be truthful, and at the same time polite. The postprandial contentment had Uncle Henry firmly in its grasp.
"I don't see as you've changed none, Mother. You look just about the same to me as you did 30 years ago when we was married, only prettier."
A faded pink blossomed upon Aunt Belinda's wrinkled cheeks, and her keen eyes softened. The old man leaned forward out of his chair.
Mother, if we want married and I was to ask you, would you come now, like Miss Cynthia and Chandler?"
"I reckon I would." He got up, went to her, and bent down to kiss her.
30 years," he said. "It don't seem as if we was old, Mother, does it?"
"No, Henry, it doesn't. And we ain't, neither. Love never gets old."
End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of A Weaver of Dreams by Myrtle Reed. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 24. The Sunset Hour. After the first time, Miss Cynthia steadfastly refused to go to Chandler's house again, but insisted that he should come to her, as was right and proper. Judith went to the city and selected a wheelchair for him that could be used upon the street. The day it came, he went out of his little yard for the first time in 25 years. Apart, and more alone than ever, Judith watched the two, so strangely brought together after many years. Forgetting the silver that shone fitfully in Chandler's hair and made a crown of glory upon Miss Cynthia's beautiful head, they had magically become young again. With a queer little pain at her heart, Judith comprehended Miss Cynthia's intervals of absent-mindedness, when the wonderful eyes, softened with dreams and tears, looked at things they saw not, searching the far beyond for things they could not see. The situation had become reversed. Once Miss Cynthia, lonely, though unselfish, had sat apart and communed with herself while the lovers were unconscious even of her remote existence. Now Judith spent solitary evenings in the upper room, with only the fire for companionship, while the other two downstairs sat close together, with clasped hands bridging the empty and desolate years. Just as Judith had waited for Carter upon the upper balcony, Miss Cynthia sat there now, straining her eyes for the first glimpse of the wheelchair. Chandler always came to dinner, and even though the afternoon was cold, Miss Cynthia, in her white and silver coat, bade brave defiance to all Judith's warnings, and watched for her lover, as was her woman's right. More beautiful than ever, Miss Cynthia literally radiated joy. Roses bloomed upon her cheeks again, as they had in years gone by. Her sweet voice, once high and clear, was filled with deep undertones of tenderness. The music of it thrilled Judith to the heart. It was so full of longing and appeal. Practical considerations appeared before Judith, but did not disturb Miss Cynthia at all. For instance, where were they to live? Chandler's house was small and inappropriate, and Miss Cynthia's double-decked mansion was hardly the place for a man who left his wheelchair only to be lifted into bed. Judith pondered through many a wakeful hour before the inspiration came to her. But would Aunt Cynthia go? The little old lady was extraordinarily self-willed. Would Chandler accept it? And yet, why not? Judith waited, fearing to speak. The golden afternoon was waning. Long purple shadows lay upon the valley, while the last light lingered upon the hills. Flaming tapestries of sunset hung from the high walls of heaven, at once a death and a promise of resurrection. Miss Cynthia, closely wrapped in her splendor, sat facing it. She reminded Judith of a saint upon a stained glass window, so radiant was she from the sunset and from the light within. "Dear," said Judith softly, "you'll have to have a wedding gown." "Why?" asked Miss Cynthia dreamily. Her eyes were fixed upon the road below. "Everybody does," Judith answered with a little laugh. "I'm not everybody," the old lady murmured. "No, but you can't be married as though you weren't anybody. Will you let me go to town to-morrow and get you a wedding gown? White satin and lace veil, and orange blossoms, and everything else that goes with it." "I don't know what you're talking about, Judith," the disturbed one remarked fretfully. "Why should you prattle about white satin on a day like this? Do you see that wonderful sunset? Isn't it the most perfect day God ever made? And he's coming. He'll be here inside of half an hour." "For that half hour you must be sensible," said Judith with affected sternness. She went to the little white and silver figure, lifted the saucy chin, and kissed the sweet lips. "Would you mind telling me, dear, as woman to woman, what you intend to be married in?" "My purple velvet," said Miss Cynthia promptly. "Dearest, it's impossible." Nothing is impossible in this world of miracles, my dear. We speak as though the days of magic were over, but they're not. Aunt Cynthia, your purple velvet is low-necked, isn't it? Somewhat. Do you consider it indecent? For daytime wear, yes. Unless you're going to be married in the evening, you can't wear it. I will if I want to. I'm going to be married in church as near sunset as possible, and I'm going to wear my purple velvet. Why church? Queried Judith. Why sunset? Why the velvet gown? Miss Cynthia turned to Judith with the air of a teacher about to turn a fountain of wisdom upon the parching minds of an eager class. Church? Because marriage is a religious ceremony, and religion belongs to church. Indeed, most people keep theirs there exclusively. Sunset, because we're both in our declining years. Morning and high noon are not for people of 50, are they? Besides, it's like that, pointing to the splendor in the west. The wonder and the glory at the close of a long, dull day. This is my hour. And the purple velvet, because it belongs with the sunset, and with me. And because I wore it, the night that she hesitated and dimpled in lovely confusion. Because I look like a real lady in it, don't I? She concluded with airy defiance. Oh, you darling, said Judith half to herself. Forgive me. You shall have all the purple velvet you want. I'll have the church upholstered with it if you say so. Not at all, said Miss Cynthia, disclaiming the offer with a wave of her hand. I'm a simple and modest person with quiet tastes. What are you going to give me for a wedding present? She inquired with childlike interest. Judith knelt beside the old lady's low chair. Haven't you guessed? Haven't you thought of the one thing I have to give you? The one thing that you ought to have? No, murmured Miss Cynthia, I haven't. She stood up for a moment, shading her eyes, but there were no signs of the approaching chair, so she settled back again. Where are you going to live, dear? I don't know. Any place. Both places. Under a red umbrella on the river bank. It doesn't matter. But it does. Guess, dearest. I can't. Don't torment me by making me use my mind when I don't want to. The House of Hearts, said Judith softly. Miss Cynthia turned startled. No, she said. You mustn't. But I must. It's mine, isn't it? Besides, I've already deeded it to you, and you can't say a single word. She stopped the flood of protestations with a kiss. Miss Cynthia's eyes filled. The dear little house, she said half to herself. All for me, and for him? Yes, said Judith, choking back her own tears. Built for a bride, and to be given to the loveliest bride that ever was as a wedding gift from someone who loves her very, very much. Judith! Miss Cynthia lifted her arms, and the two wept together, as is the way of women when they are very, very happy. I can't believe it, sobbed Miss Cynthia. What a long, awful day I've had, and what a wonderful sunset I'm having now. Judith, do you think it's wrong for anybody to be so happy as I am? No, dear, it's perfectly right. Look, she pointed to the road below. You mustn't let him find you crying. No, said Miss Cynthia, rising and hurriedly wiping her eyes. I mustn't. She went down and was waiting for him at the door when the chair turned in at the gate. Judith walked back and forth slowly upon the veranda, glad she had given as she had. Carter would be glad too when he knew. She must write him a note and tell him. She had heard through Chandler and Miss Cynthia of the engagement, and also that Marjorie had chosen to live in town, where so much was going on all the time that one could never be dull. If the house had been built for Miss Cynthia and Chandler, it could not have been more suitable in every way. The low bungalow with only 4 or 5 steps to the porch and no stairs at all inside. She decided upon additional bookcases for the living room and den. Otherwise, she would finish it as she had meant to do long ago, and the few last touches should be those she had planned for herself, even to the pink and white chintz in one dressing room and the blue and white in the other. The name of the house was right, too, and the stationery, for which the dye had been made months previously, and the garden to be abloom with roses wherever roses could be made to grow. Strangely, also, the verses belonged to Miss Cynthia and Chandler, who had come to their joy so late. Little sunset, house of hearts, standing all alone, I could come and sweep the leaves from your stepping stone. I and he could light your fires, laughing at the rain. But oh, it's far to happiness, a short way back again. It had been far to happiness for Miss Cynthia and Chandler, but because they had waited, it had come at last, with no shadows to divide or deny them, and no barriers to lie between. "I'll wait too," said Judith to herself. "If it's meant for me, it will come, and if it isn't, I don't want it." That night after dinner, when the fire was blazing in the fireplace in the downstairs living room, when Chandler's attendant was making merry in the kitchen with Miss Cynthia's household staff out of sight yet within call, when Judith, with the plea of an interesting book, had betaken herself to her lonely hearthstone upstairs, Miss Cynthia pushed a little footstool close to Chandler's chair and knelt upon it, leaning against him. In the little broken phrases she told him what Judith had done. She was stirred to the depths by the pity of it. Judith's own joy had so gone astray. The man said nothing. He only stroked his old sweetheart's silver hair. "Isn't it wonderful?" she asked. "No," the deep voice answered. "Nothing is wonderful but this." "But it's part of this, isn't it, Martin?" "Surely, dear. Everything is, isn't it? Is there anything in the whole wide world that doesn't belong to this?" "Yes. Pain and sorrow and waiting and hungry hearts. Those don't belong." "We've had those, dearest. Have you forgotten?" "I've forgotten everything," sighed Miss Cynthia. "That unspeakable horror, and that one dear hour together in the midst of it, and then the long waiting, then this. It's as if we'd died in the wreck, isn't it, and had gone straight on to heaven? Do you think heaven can be any more than this, or different?" "No. If God himself is love, what else can heaven be save immortality, with no fear of parting?" Miss Cynthia leaned closer. "There isn't much time left for us to be together, Martin. We've come to sunset now, and the night must be very near us. Have you thought of that?" "Yes, I've thought of it. But this isn't all. It can't be. Our mortal life is only the flaming arc of a circle, as someone has said, the rainbow between two silences. The rest of the circle is wrapped in shadow, so we cannot see or even guess what lies beyond, but the arc implies the circle, just as night means day if you look far enough into it." "Yes, but sometimes, when I think of all we might have had—" "Hush, sweetheart. You must never think of that, nor must I. The things that are meant for us come to us when we are meant to have them. Dawn and high noon and the long days of struggle may be for the others, but sunset is for us, and twilight. And night, too, Martin. The long night out upon the circle, when the arc merges into it." "Yes, dear." "Together." "Always together, darling. Never to be parted any more." He leaned forward and lifted her up into his arms as though she were a child. He kissed the full soft throat, the silvered hair, the dimpled hands, the wonderful dreamy eyes, and then the sweet lips, answering him with the rapture that follows long denial. "Always together," she murmured again, and the man's deep voice echoed, "Always." Carter's normal masculine conceit was somewhat injured by the fact that Judith had suggested a double wedding in the church when she found that Marjorie and Miss Cynthia had chanced to choose the same wedding day. Judith made all the plans for it, directed the decoration of the church, and ordered a wedding feast to be served at Miss Cynthia's with 2 cakes, one for each bride. Not forgetting Miss Cynthia's favorite poison ivy, but taking care to handle it with gloves, Judith had filled the church with autumn leaves, great boughs of gold and crimson, mingled with the russet of the oaks, and trailing vines of gold and scarlet everywhere. The sunset streamed through the stained glass windows, carrying the color of autumn into every nook and corner. The fragrance of it floated in through the open door to the murmur of drifted leaves. Upon the altar the yellow taper lights gleamed like fallen stars. Mr. and Mrs. Warner, with Judith and the minister's wife, sat in the front pews. Carter and Marjorie were married first. Marjorie in the white linen gown Judith had embroidered for her own wedding. Pale but lovely, with the particular loveliness that belongs to brides. Then Miss Cynthia, in her purple velvet gown and white hat, went up to the altar, beside Chandler's chair, and knelt while the brief service was said. It had not been planned, but Judith instinctively followed Miss Cynthia when she went, and held her hand all through the ceremony, bridesmaid at the wedding that was to have been her own. Judith went back with Chandler walking beside him. Mr. and Mrs. Warner and the minister and his wife followed them. The others went in Carter's automobile. The feast was meant to be gay, but it was not. Wedding feasts seldom are, and everyone was relieved when it was over. The minister and his wife disappeared, then the Warners followed, Uncle Henry's joy at departure being painfully evident, as he was not a visitin' man. The bride in purple velvet went to her new home in the car, to be waiting at the door when her husband came with his attendant. Neither of them had seen the house. Marjorie and Judith were left alone until the car should come to take Marjorie back to Chandler's, while she changed her wedding gown for her street costume she was to wear into town. Marjorie spoke first.
"Oh, Judith,"
she said, with a laugh that was half a sob.
"I'm so happy."
"Are you?" queried the older woman, with a beautiful, serene smile.
"I'm glad. I hope you always will be. I'm sure you will be."
"Judith," said Marjorie, with youth's unconscious cruelty,
"don't you care? I mean, you couldn't have cared, could you?"
"No," said Judith calmly. "I couldn't have cared." The old pain stabbed at her heart for a moment, then went away, to return, as she guessed, more than once in the lonely days that lay ahead.
"I'll say good-bye now, if you don't mind," she went on. "I've been driven mad by a headache almost all day. I'll see you both often later on." "Yes," Marjorie said, lifting her face to be kissed. "You must come to us often. Good-bye."
The car was already humming and purring along the river road, so Marjorie went out to meet it, and Judith went upstairs, glad to be alone at last. From the safe shelter of Aunt Cynthia's room she saw Carter assist his bride into the car, and guessed, by the quick glance he sent to the upper windows, that Marjorie had passed on her excuse. "I ought to have waited," said Judith to herself. "I could have been decent for 15 more minutes, I guess, if I'd tried." From below came the mournful clatter of dishes. Saddest sound on earth to those who dread the inevitable washing. Judith looked at her own white hands, smooth and beautifully kept. "I'm spared that," she thought. I've been spared lots of things." Because it was her home, and the only one she had, Judith had chosen to stay on alone in the old house, for a time at least. It seemed singularly desolate without Aunt Cynthia, but Judith told herself sternly that she was a grown woman, not a child, and that she mustn't let herself be lonely. Why, she had everything, except the one thing she wanted. Forcing back the tears, she went out upon the balcony. In pride of purple and pomp of gold, the day and summer were dying together. The 1,000 miles of splendor stretched away to the sea. Valleys full of silver mists, hills veiled by amethystine haze, a sunset lain down upon the earth, to dream awhile, and then to sleep. "I wonder if it's sunset for me, too," she thought. "Or is there another day to come?" Something Chandler had told her once came back to her. Nobody could take away from her the things she had had. They were hers securely, beyond all chance of change. And the things that were truly hers should come to her and abide with her forever, not to be destroyed or taken away or lost. And so she must be content. She must learn to wait and keep on dreaming. Upon her loom of life she had worked out a single episode, but it was not yet far enough out of the loom so that she could understand, or even see, the design. To be a weaver of dreams, to put the golden thread into the warp and woof of the fabric, to make the best, steadily, of what little she might have, to sink self in service, and to find the wonderful way of life as it is written in terms of self-abandonment, this lay before her now. And with the golden thread to make a literal cloth of gold, to transfigure even a gloomy fabric by the magic of dreams, to spread this tapestry everywhere within her house of life, to seek steadily for joy until she deserved it, even commanded it. Then mysteriously, from the far corners of the earth, it would come, as Chandler had said, and as his own life had proved. Slowly the glory died. On flame-bright hills the last light still lingered, but sadly, as though it was never to come again. A cold wind came from the east where light was born. Judith shivered a little, but she still stood there, thinking. The afterglow shone behind the trees, but faintly. In the midst of it was the pale gold crescent of the autumn moon. A star or two came out, the advance guard of that celestial army which was to set the heavens ablaze with javelins of silver light. Fallen leaves murmured, sending subtle fragrance afar into the dusk as they drifted across the road. A belated squirrel scampered madly across the garden, on his way to his home in a hollow tree, stirring a cricket to shrill pipings of resentment which presently ceased. To-night might have been so different, thought Judith, if it had been meant to be. Already her feet were firmly set upon the paths of peace. The things that are mine I shall have, she went on to herself, so I'll wait, and dream, till they come. Smiling, serene, and fully content, she turned and went in, alone. End of chapter 24. End of A Weaver of Dreams by Myrtle Reed. Recorded by Celine Major. Thank you for listening.